Their main objective is to have power. So therefore they are connected through subcultural elements.
I believe in the criminal world, being loyal is something very important.
You know, you talked about 800 different groups, and we saw from the same report that a lot of those are involved in polycrime in various different markets and can also shift between markets.
And so imagine how powerful is the new technology if a ritual can work with a screen.
Connected to technology and trust and loyalty. These are, let's say, the key elements we have to take into consideration.
It's like a cocktail. Everything comes together perfectly.
When we mention ethnic-based mafia, we refer to approximately 820 organized groups with more than 25,000 operatives in the world, as Europol noted recently, who have specific bonds. So their main objective is not only profit, as in serious crime organization. Their main objective is to have power. Yeah. So therefore they are connected through subcultural elements. Yeah. They share a common language. They share roots, family roots, clan roots, and they are very adaptable to the transformation and the changes in the cultural context with international outreach. So this is the very specific dimension of ethnic-based mafia, which is different from other form of serious crime where profit is at the center.
So in this kind of mafia groups, also the legacy of the family seems that it's important. So if your family has already a legacy and a name on this illicit market, then it's the idea that you have to follow that and you have to give your example, and you need to take it even further forward.
For sure, it is important, the belonging, the dimension of family and clan is one of the marks of power and legitimacy. So through belonging, through a common language, through rituals, because in order to enter the family, you have a number of rituals. It is not like entering an NGO. So there are specific rituals. There is a doctrine. There is an history. There is a narrative behind each one of these groups. And therefore, this is what makes them very specific. What is important in the context of the Phygital project is also the fact that these traditional organizations who are here in Italy or in Albania or in other countries, in Turkey and in other countries for more than 1,000 years, these organizations are evolving or changing under the pressure of police forces, under the social transformation, under technological transformation. So they are traditional, but very adaptive in the meantime. And this is their key mark, I would say. And this is the center of the project Phygital today.
I also believe that one of the important elements and traits of these ethnic groups, it's also their ability to be loyal, because I believe in the criminal world, being loyal is something very important. And because of the fact that these people come from the same environment, the same culture, the same symbols, then it's more easy for them to be loyal. And so for this reason, the criminal organization that they take part is more successful, let's say. And also this poses a real risk for the law enforcement. And I believe that in order to penetrate these organizations is way more difficult than some other criminal groups because of the strong family ties that they have, the loyalty that they display. It makes it more difficult for the law enforcement in order to enter and to really try to crack them.
Yeah, this is the traditional image of mafia-style groups. But in the meantime, we have something new in the last years, because the society evolves and also ethnic-based mafia evolves. So they have access to new society. Imagine somebody from Calabria, a small village in Calabria, emigrating to Canada or emigrating to Australia, confronted with the new society, confronted with technology. How do we communicate? Traditionally, they communicate through the so-called pizzini or vocal cooperation. So personal dialogues, they don't trust. Usually they didn't trust telephones, technology, and so on. Today, from Australia to the small village in Calabria, or to decide an alliance somewhere else, they need to use technology. So they are very adaptive. The profile of this organization is that they are traditional, so family linked, family bond, loyalty based on common subcultural dimensions, tradition, rituals, symbols, but in the meantime, very flexible, capable of changing their position, adopting new solution, to be integrated in the States, in North America, in South America, in Europe, with a very different profile. So this is the challenge we have in front of us.
No, maybe it's also that they're adaptive in terms of the markets that they go into, in terms of the illicit markets, because, you know, you talked about 800 different groups, and we saw from the same report that a lot of those are involved in polycrime in various different markets and can also shift between markets. So this agility, again, this adaptability that we see in all these different aspects.
In my work, as you know, I work a lot with Nigerian culture. And as you know, girls are brought to Europe, especially Italy, and they are under a very strong ritual that we call juju. Some of them they call voodoo, but the right term is juju. And many times ago, the juju was made in Nigeria. You go in front of native doctor and you swear. Now I met many girls that told me that this kind of juju is made on the screen in internet.
Very interesting.
And so imagine how powerful is the new technology if a ritual can work with a screen. So how powerful is the culture? This is the point.
Yeah. I think we have to highlight the importance of the cultural dimension confronted with the performative, the operative dimension. Because usually law enforcement agencies tend to consider, because they conduct investigations, so they tend to focus on criminal activities. Here, we have something else. Criminal activities are the result of a specific sociological and subcultural dimension. And if we want to tackle or we want to prevent this phenomenon, we have to carefully analyze also the subcultural dimension and the elements who characterize the software of this system. The hardware is the criminal dimension, but the software is a subcultural dimension which makes them strong. The groups loyal. They tend not to betray their own organization because behind there are family connections, behind there are parental relations, behind there are small villages somewhere else in the world. And this is a problem we have with the Italians, with Ndrangheta, with other organizations, with Camorra, and so on. But we have also with Chinese groups or Chinese organizations. We have the same with Nigerian, as you mentioned. We have the same with Albanian, belonging to specific groups and organizations. This is the problem we have in front of us, which goes behind the investigative dimension. Public-private cooperation, so activities done by NGOs in the field, is one of the key to provide a different angle for this analysis and therefore for operative operations.
one of the major criminal activity right now that we are seeing is of course drug trafficking. I believe for European groups at least, drug trafficking is their major commodity. Drug is major commodity. And then when we speak about drugs, of course there are some changes. The most lucrative market without any doubt is cocaine market. And so we see a lot of these 800 ethnic groups involved in cocaine trafficking. But of course, the most consumed drug in Europe right now is cannabis. And of course, a lot of them are also involved in the illicit cultivation and the trafficking of cannabis. And more now we are seeing synthetic drugs. And so this is a real risk in terms of the fact that those are endless, and the opportunities and the possibilities to create them also are endless. So you can just have a small lab and then you have this drug produced in very large amounts. But European groups are more right now focused on drug trafficking, and of course there are also overlaps with human trafficking, human smuggling, armed trafficking, and on top of that is the money laundering, because of course the crime generates profits, so these profits needs to be laundered. So money launder is what ties all of these groups together.
I think what you say about the synthetic drugs at the moment is, and we'll come on to that, I'm sure, but it's a really interesting question, and a question that needs to be asked, because with the changes in the poppy and heroin importation from Afghanistan as well, I think the risk is that not just we have more synthetic drugs on the market, but more powerful, more potent synthetic drugs on the market, which there's a gap, of course, in terms of organized crime groups moving into that and seeing the potential for profit, but also the real health implications of what you mentioned.
Yeah, that is a real risk, because what we are seeing right now, for example, in the Balkan route, what comes from what was coming from Afghanistan and then Iran and Turkey, and then through the Balkan to Europe, it was heroin for many decades. What we're seeing now coming the most is methamphetamine. And so this is the new thing, and it brings way more challenges when it comes to health and other implications.
Yeah, one of the problems we have is that the fragmentation in production and fragmentation in distribution is very dangerous, because somehow you lose the capability to control these groups. And there is also an internal fight among these groups who were traditionally organized in a division of labor. Today, with small labs producing synthetic drugs, with certain drugs produced in Europe, because in the past, let's say cocaine, we had two main centers for the production, South America, Afghanistan, that area. Now, with the new drugs, you can produce the new drugs in your garage somewhere, in the underground, and you can try to distribute it with your friends, with terrible effects. So the fragmentation is a huge risk and goes behind the problem of ethnic mafia. While at the end, you have always one very important point: follow the money, because they gain so much money that they don't know how to reinvest it, how to hide it. And therefore, if we want to be successful, we need to follow the money. And to follow the money, again, requires the cooperation between different agencies, because they are adaptive, as you said, and they are so adaptive that they can use cryptocurrency today. They can use completely different tools in order to reinvest money and in order to use these systems which are difficult to be tracked.
It's very interesting what they can use. I think that the globalization and the technology, of course, is working on their advantage. So they are getting some of these new favors that the technology brings to them in order to facilitate their operation. But on the other hand, they are also keeping the traditional aspects. So, for example, and this is something that we see also when it comes to money transfer and money laundering. So we see these organizations using, for example, Havala. So Havala way of transferring money, it's ancient, and they are still using today with a lot of success. On the other hand, the same groups that they are using Havala, they are investing in cryptocurrencies. And they are using also cryptocurrencies. And so this is why it's challenging right now, because before you had only these traditional means. So, police, they knew what to look about. Right now, they are having everything, traditional, technology, initiatives. So it's more difficult and it's fragmented. Also in terms of fragmentation, this is very true, because now the risk is everywhere. If before you had these areas, these geographies, and you were looking for the flows of drugs or people to come in certain routes, now they are coming from everywhere. So, for example, one thing that we see is the fragmentation of cannabis cultivation, illicit cannabis cultivation. So before you would have Albania, for example, that it was a center for illicit cultivation of cannabis. Right now, the people that they were cultivating cannabis in Albania, they are now cultivating it in Spain, indoors and outdoors. They are cultivating that in the UK and in many other areas. Before, certain countries in the Balkans, they will be supplied by Albanians, organized crime groups in cannabis cultivation. Now they don't need anymore. People in North Macedonia are cultivating there. People in Kosovo are doing the same. So everybody is cultivating cannabis right now.
What we have to pay attention is the places. Traditionally, the places were always the same. If I think about drug market, in my experience, the place was the streets. Mm-hmm. Now everything is changed, especially for youths. Now another place is the web, is the dark web, is the chat, Telegram, or other chat the young people use very, very easily. So, and also for the sex market. Yes, after COVID, after 2020, the girls are moved from the outdoor indoor. In Italy, it was very common to find prostitute on the road, along the road. They stand and they look for clients. Now everything is changed, but the reasoning in my work is, now what is the place? Where is the correct place where we are to look for? Is the street? No, it's not the street anymore. It's inside our phone. It's very easy to find sex, drug, organs, marriage, also marriage, in our phone, in the web. So,
a common framework is loyalty and trust. Because in order to pay somebody through Hawala, you need to trust the person, because otherwise, if you don't trust the person, you lose the money. In order to make payments through phone cards, which is another very important system, you can make payments up to 10,000, 12,000 euro through phone cards, and then you cash the money in a specific location in a certain country. Again, you need trust. In order to provide somebody with the substance, with the drug for the distribution, again, trust. And again, trust brings us back to where are the elements of trust. So what are the bonds among the people? So again, there, the investigative dimension need to be combined with the subcultural dimension. Even though the fragmentation is and remain a key problem, because force everybody to enter in a new game where you don't have a hierarchical structures, and you're forced to, you're confronted with small groups capable of organizing their own sub-trafficking, and this produce a high level of conflictuality, a high level of conflicts, a level of infights between the different groups, therefore violence, therefore petty crimes, and therefore this is another problem that has a strong impact on the population.
Maybe just combining your 2 points, because I think they're both really interesting. On the one hand, the digital, and on the other hand, the trust. And what we see as well in the Netherlands, for example, is that digital aspect is combined with the culture, with playing into youth culture. You mentioned it already, really playing into the social media, the presence of young people on social media, and also the things that are considered as status symbols by young people, right? Using social media to approach and recruit, but then also offering things as bait that they know act as status symbols within youth culture. So manipulating both the digital dimension and still the traditional culture dimension. It's really interesting.
This will be our challenge.
Yeah.
Only one point. Let me introduce. Let's take the example of Chinese connection.
Yeah.
They use WeChat and as alternative to WhatsApp. And for us, access to WeChat is difficult. Why? Because in order to be registered in WeChat, you need another Chinese who allows you, who connect his own telephone number, her own telephone number with yours. And therefore, in order to access WeChat is difficult. And everything is in Chinese with a lot of symbolic around it, a lot of key elements which belong specifically to the Chinese culture. And they are very fragmented as organization, but they have a hierarchy. They gain ton of money. We have example of investigation in Italy. They gather a huge amount of money. All the systems they use are connected to their culture. So there is also a difficulty by the police force to have specialized groups with a specific Chinese culture capable of talking the dialects, because that's another problem. They don't speak Mandarin, they speak local dialects, and they use local dialects in WeChat. So again, the cultural dimension connected to technology and trust and loyalty. These are, let's say, the key elements we have to take into consideration.
It's like a cocktail. Everything comes together perfectly.
I mean, one of the things we've already touched on, but it's so characteristics of illicit markets in the EU and the way the organized crime groups work in the EU, that they operate across borders. And what we see, for example, in drug trafficking is, of course, that the groups like the Albanian groups have collaborations with the groups in Latin America, Colombia, Ecuador, on the supplier side of things when it comes to the cocaine trafficking. But then when the drugs are shipped through European ports, collaboration with other groups in Belgium, in Holland, and then on the distribution side, again, trafficking containers to Germany. And you've already mentioned the Hawala system, but also other forms of kind of informal cash transfer. Of course, the profits need to go back to the home base. So having even just, we had a recent case with an Albanian group where it was quite clear that they'd physically shipped cash just in trucks from one side of Europe to the other side. And that, so there's just so much of the criminal process that has a cross-border dimension.
It's a real challenge right now, because what we are seeing is these small groups, ethnic groups, that in their core they have the family or friends from the same hometown. They suddenly become international. Their operations are international. So their essence is conservative and traditional, their core. But when it comes to operations that they conduct operations across the world. Doesn't matter how big or how small they are. So for example, a group that is a European group, they need to go to South America in order to have to procure cocaine. And of course they cannot do it on themselves. They need to be linked with producer. They have to be linked with the gangs or organized crime groups of the country where they are going to ship it from. And of course, sometimes the route is not direct. It's not, for example, Brazil, Europe. Sometimes they also pass through West Africa. And then there is a need there to also have alliances with the groups of those areas in order to take it from that point and to ship it further up. And then you need to move the money. And so you have these Chinese companies, so they will transfer the money from you. So this is another layer of partners. And you need to sell that drug that you have acquired. So you would need to give it to another group of another ethnicity in Europe or beyond in order to have that. And then at the end of the day, you need also to find shelter, and you have to evade justice. And which is the best place to do so? In many cases is UAE, for example. What we are seeing is the fact that a lot of criminals, not only from Europe, but also globally, they are finding shelter in UAE. in order to evade extradition, in order to launder their money and to invest. And so, of course, you also need links there. So you see how much they are linked, this group, how much international there are. So also sometimes when you see their communication from the police files, you see that sometimes in one message, for example, they can use 3 languages. So they use Albanian, they use Spanish, and they use English in one message. So this means that these groups right now are very much international, and there is a need to do so. And what we are seeing, it seems that is this dark side of globalization. So we are more connected as civil society, but also illicit society is also very, very well connected.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, Facciona. We have to consider that this exposes this organization also to investigations. Because being glocal, I think this is the word, to be glocal, they are exactly glocal, roots at home in their country of origin and international dimension. However, for logistic, communication, and in order to recruit people, they need new services. And digital as a service is probably another key word to understand how they operate, because they cannot organize the whole supply chain independently. So there is a division of labor. We know from experience, from analysis and investigations, that there are certain groups specialized in the detailed distribution, so the last chain of the system. Then you have wholesalers also, special groups, organization with similar connection and bonds who are specialized in wholesale. And then there are the bosses. But each one then need to rely on extra services. You cannot organize recycling in the proper way unless you have strong support in the society, because otherwise you have to bring money in luggages, and it's very difficult. You can't be caught. So you need to have support and to enter into complex digital operations using crypto. The same for communication. We know from ANOM, we know from Sky ACC, these are important investigations. We know that they use encrypted telephones. Encryption is one of the key, but in the meantime, they are exposed to the police. ANOM is a perfect example. The system was set up by the American police, FBI, and at the end of the day, it was like a net to catch all these groups. So the two sides, globalization on one side, open the market for them, provide for them a division of labor in the supply chain, in the market, but in the meantime expose them to the police forces. And if we are strong enough with the public-private cooperation, putting together banks, financial institutions, and different organizations, then we can easily somehow predict and understand this transformation and counter ethnic-based mafia organized crime groups.
I want to make you an example. Anti-trafficking Italian system works only in the port. You know that the problem of migrants, of human trafficking, is also by port, by the sea. Many of them arrived by Libya or Tunisia. It's very common that when the people arrive with the rescue boats of NGO, we are there, okay, and we give the migrants some information about their rights and about your rights if you are a victim of human trafficking. Because in Italy, I'm very proud of this law. Every time I say this, we have a very beautiful law for the protection of the victim of human trafficking. And when you see the people that come down from the boats, because you are here, people come down, you immediately see how the crime is well organized, how the group are well organized. Because the first things that you see is that the communities are divided. Ethiopian with Ethiopian, Nigerian with Nigerian, other groups with other groups. And it's immediately clear that they take a paper with the phone and they immediately again send the GPS location one day, it was 2024, the 23rd of July. I remember this date very clear in my mind because I met a very young Nigerian girl. She was minor. She was 15 years old. And I say, okay, I'm Gloria. I'm an anti-trafficking operator. You know that if you are involved, if somebody bring you here to make something that you don't want, like illicit economies, prostitution, and blah, 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 blah. And she say, okay, I come with you. After some months, because it takes time to tell the story, it takes time for the victims, she told me, you know, that day, exactly that day that you meet me, not me in the anti-trafficking system, in that case it was me, but it should be everybody of the system. He say, that day, that specific day, my traffickants, my madam in this case, she was waiting outside the port for me. So I thought immediately, how strong is the connection? This lady, this young lady came from a connection house to Libya. Do you know what is connection house? Connection house is the place where girls make prostitution. And the madam, the organization, because it's not only the madam, the organization know that she arrives, and the organization know exactly where she arrives. And it's frightening because we don't know when they arrives. The traffickants know.
So yeah, I was going to ask, is it similar, the encrypted channels that are being used for that communication? Can we say that there's a kind of similar communication channel to the drug trafficking where
Yes,
it's
100%.
Yeah.
Let me give you one example. One interception which I have in mind. It was an interception among three guys. It was one Italian, one Turkish, and another nationality. And they discussed how to buy a certain telephone. They were convinced that their phone was encrypted. In reality, the SIMs was intercepted by a judiciary authority. So in order to decide how to buy that specific encrypted telephone, using this so-called secure line, they went back to their traditional system. So the person who was supposed to sell the telephone, and this person was in Germany, they asked, but what are the connection of this person? Is he a member of this family? He has a relation with the other one. So they decide that the person could be trusted just because of the family bonds and the past of this person, using interception system, and in order to buy a telephone which was supposed to be a secure encrypted telephone. In reality, the guy was an informant of the police. So, but this is the system in order to give you an idea. So they strongly rely on new technology. And don't forget that we speak about drugs, we speak about trafficking on human beings, but they are, as we say, very adaptive, and therefore all this business or polycrimes. We know that the people who transfer drugs from South America to the Gulf of Guinea in Africa in order to enter Europe using then the support of the Italian Mafia through Malta across Libya, these groups use the same routes, the same logistic for trafficking in human beings, for weapons, for drugs, for gold, for money. So you see, polycrime, very adaptive. These people are capable of doing a lot of business. In the meantime, using the logistic they establish in a specific field and transferring best practices in their own perspective.
And it's a very traditional combination almost, no? The drug trafficking route, the migrant smuggling route, the human trafficking. I think Europe also pointed out a few years back.
It's very difficult for law enforcement right now to tackle these groups and to crack them down because they are quite close, and one of the characteristics of the ethnic groups is the fact that they are based mainly on family ties. So the first layer of the group is always somebody from your family. It might be the brother, it might be the cousin, an in-law, and so on. The second layer of these groups is often people from the same community. So people that they have been gone to the school with, people from the same neighborhood, people from the same town. And then, of course, there are other layers, and there are also foreigners that they are also part of these groups. However, they are never full part of this group. So they have different kind of layers, how they interact. And of course, they have a lot of partners. They have a lot of partners across geographies in order to sustain their activities. And for law enforcement, to crack this core, which is quite tight and knit tight, it's very difficult. It's very difficult because those are organizations that have been built on loyalty. And people that they are working from some hometown or some village or some big cities, still those are people that they know very well. They know very well, and the reason why they have them is in order to make pressure. So they can pressure the people very easily. So if I know your family, if I know where you live, so for me it's very easy to pressure you, and we have seen this in many cases. Also, what is something very interesting is the fact that what we have seen is that they look for people from the same nationality and origin because they feel more comfortable in terms of sharing, in terms of pressuring them, and so on. I just want to bring you an example from this, and this example goes back to 2022, when we saw in the English Channel, we saw 12,000 Albanians crossing the Channel in order to go to the UK. Now you might wonder why. I mean, who are these people, and why in 2022, where Albanians, they can freely go to Europe and visit and all of these things, get a job, why they are taking this risk in order to go to the UK. And then it was understood that a big part of this move came from organized crime groups of Albania in the UK, because they had criminal operations there, they were engaged in the cannabis cultivation, in drug trafficking and so on, and they needed foot soldiers. They needed foot soldiers in order to take them. Of course, they could have there many other nationalities that they can collaborate, but still it's not the same thing as having somebody from your country. And this kind of decision for Omerta not to speak when law enforcement come after you, so this is one of the major challenges of the law enforcement today.
Well, I agree with you, Fationa, but I would add another layer to this discussion. Let's say organized crime groups are more advanced than police forces. More advanced, why? First of all, because they don't have the limits of jurisdictions. So police forces operate within specific jurisdictions. Second one, they are not limited by competences, while police forces work in silos. And this isolation, again, the problem of fragmentation that we mentioned before, is one of the big obstacles for police forces to disrupt these organizations. So these organizations are global, have an international dimension and roots in their country of origin. They are very adaptive, meaning that through DaaS services, so digital as a service, they can have access to new technology, artificial intelligence, a new solution for the falsification of documents, new platforms to transfer money. So this is done in a way that, let's say, is very modern, is very adaptive, because they can buy people, researchers, they can buy people to produce for them platforms. Therefore, while the police forces are limited by tenders, or limited by cooperation with the university, by cooperation with the civil society. So the main problem we have in front of us is that organized crime groups are very adaptive, or global, and or phygital. So they operate in the territorial dimension and in the virtual dimension. This is the meaning of phygital. While law enforcement agencies and judiciary is limited by specific jurisdiction, specific competences, and they work in silos. This is the main challenge, because unless we have contacts with organizations who deal with victims. And we convince the victims to cooperate with us in order to acquire information, to have intelligence. Unless we work with banks, unless we work with specialized professionals capable of providing us the necessary tool, if we don't do this, then they will be always one step ahead. And this is our main problem today.
Yeah, and there's some great examples of that as well. If we look, you mentioned the EncroChat and Sky ECC already, but the fact that you shut down one encrypted platform, already they're on another platform, and it's like a whack-a-mole type of system where you're constantly, as law enforcement, trying to keep up with the pace of change. And it's something we see in drug trafficking all the time in terms of the methods that are used, right? So, you know, you talked about public-private cooperation. It's something that's worked really well, for example, in the port of Rotterdam. But as soon as that closes one corridor, there's another avenue that's found. We had the rip-on, rip-off methods a lot with container drugs trafficking through containers in Rotterdam. That's now less of an issue, but there's new ways of trafficking, for example, through cooler containers, and you see this adaptability, agility of the groups everywhere. And you know, you mentioned also the cross-border dimension, of course. You said it as well. That's kind of forcing law enforcement to work outside of their traditional jurisdictions, and it's also operational frameworks, right? It's not just the legislation, but the ways of working, culture in one law enforcement organization may be different than another law enforcement organization in another part of Europe. So you're constantly running into these barriers, and we have in the European Union, of course, already some instruments that help, like the Internal Security Fund, that are really meant to improve this cooperation between law enforcement organizations. But like you say, they're faced with barriers that organized crime groups don't have, and that's something we're continuously having to think about.
It's interesting because sometimes it can be also an issue of budgets. So we know how much budget law enforcement have in several countries. So sometimes they have very little budget in order to tackle organized crime. And when they are compared with these criminal organizations, we are talking about small criminal organizations, but they are able to have millions of euros every year. And now imagine how much money needs the police, on the other hand, to go after them. And of course, this criminal organization right now, they have become very much sophisticated. So they have started to hire not anymore only lawyers. Of course, lawyers are important for them, but they have started to hire tech guys, so people that will help them with their technology operation. They have started to hire these finance guys, these people that are going to help them with their transactions. And all of these people, they are very skilled people in what they do. But the only problem is that they are working on the wrong side. So they are helping and they're smoothing the criminal organization's operation instead of helping the police. And I was told, for example, from some prosecutor in Albania, and he said that I have one case and I need to find out the financial dimension of these organizations. But you know how much money I have to hire somebody that knows finance in order to go and to analyze and to investigate the financial transactions of this organization. They had only 300 euros in order to do so. So they would have an expert that will come in, will look all the properties and all the money transactions of this big criminal organization, and they will draft a report. And with this report, police and prosecution will use this report in order to seize the properties of this criminal organization that was able to move, tons of drugs every year. And the expert will just get 300 euros. Now imagine how little this is compared with the money that criminal organization can offer you. So this is a real problem.
Yeah, for sure, money can be one issue. But in reality, I think that the main issue is in the cultural dimension of the judiciary and police forces. Let me give you a very simple example. The prison system is a very important location to understand alliances, modification, challenges of organized crime groups. In Italy, the information produced by the prison police cannot be transferred to the national police forces. So we have a system called SIAP office. The SIAP office collects all this information, the daily report from all prisons, the daily report from the educators, the daily report from the prison police, the Polpen, and all this material enter into specific IT system of the Italian Ministry of Justice. But the parallel system of the national police, WebSID2, that is the name, has access to a very limited part of this information. Why? Because of the fragmentation of the police forces. You know, today, Carabinieri, another example, don't have access to the so-called SOS, so to the financial information, alert information of the banks. In order to have access to this information, the so-called Scorpio system, they have to pass through the finance guard. This is the limitation. One mafia organization is open in this sense. They hire somebody to produce a system in order to transfer money, and then they can pass the same system to another organization in order to transfer money and make money from this transfer. So while police forces tend to work in isolation, internal isolation and isolation with the civil society. Yeah. The information you have concerning trafficking on human beings are very important, but you don't transfer this information to police forces. So there is a competition also
but
between...
But the problem is bigger because it depends on the region that you live in Italy, because anti-trafficking system in Tuscany is different from Lombardia, from other region, and from the south. And this is dramatic also for the victim, because sometimes the victim decides to report to the police. But the problem is that the fact is made, for example, in Reggio Calabria, they go to Questura is our police office in Reggio Calabria, they report, then they arrive, for example, in Tuscany. Once they arrive in the protection program, we ask information to Calabrian office, and this information it's like a magic thing, they lost. And the office, the police office, don't talk. As Sergio told, in Italy we have Carabinieri and Polizia. And for example, if you open a report in Carabinieri, they don't communicate with Polizias. Not always, not always. In some cases, we have some problem. If for example, the girl makes two different, I have a case that a girl makes two different reports to the madam. One in Carabinieri in one region, one in police office in another region. And it was very difficult with the lawyer to say, please talk, we are talking about the same girl, the same madam, the same traffickants. So it's dramatic. And yes, the challenge is to cooperate more and to talk. Yeah. Sitting down in a table and talk, because I know things, he knows things, you know things, and together we can grow up.
That is true. It's also interesting in terms of priorities. What kind of priorities law enforcement have? Because in certain geographies, they might have different priorities. So for example, when I was researching in Ecuador about the presence of the Balkan organized crime groups, I entered into an office of a prosecutor there. And the guy was telling me piles of files in his desk. And he said, like, I mean, you know what is concerning for me? Crime in the streets. So people are mugged, people are robbed. There's a lot of criminality in the street. So this is a priority for me. International crime, it's okay, of course, priority, but it's not something that the government is going to be very happy if I investigate. So they want peace in the streets. So this is also very important in terms of having people in the law enforcement having not only the resources, but also the human, the financial resources, but also the human resources in order to sustain. And sometimes we see that many agencies throughout several geographies, they are understaffed. And sometimes the staff also is not qualified. Sometimes if you go to some police office or some prosecutor office, you will see, like, physical piles, mountains of files, and how people are going to work in this situation. So it needs more money also to put in law enforcement when it comes to technology, because we are talking about digital. But this is very important, and we know that organized crime groups, they have it. They are very much digitalized. Now the turn is to have the police and the law enforcement authority digitalized as well.
Sergio, you mentioned the Phygital-OC project. Can you tell us a little bit about what you plan to do and how that will work?
Yeah, the Phygital project is first and foremost, its aim is to establish cooperation between police forces, law enforcement agencies, between the judiciary and the civil society. One of the key we discussed in this meeting, aimed at preventing and investigating crimes connected to ethnic-based criminal groups. As we discussed, we would like to highlight, in addition to the investigative dimension, also the subcultural, the cognitive, the symbolic, the linguistic dimension as a key component of the intelligent gap we have today concerning this type of criminal organization. The second element is the fact that the mobility of these families, this clan, and the intervention of new generation, the intergenerational dimension, produce modification and changes in the criminal organized groups. And therefore, we would like to assess how this mobility and the challenges of the new society and the new technology made them more adaptive to new business models. Business models in terms of operative dimension, as we mentioned, so cryptocurrency, encrypted communication, and so on, but also digital technology to reinforce model of loyalties, to reinforce their traditional roots and the connection, the global dimension within a local context. So it is phygital because from one side, we analyze the problem from the traditional territorial dimension, so the belonging, the family, the origin, the roots of this organization. On the other hand, how do they move into the digital space? This combination is probably one of the challenges we want to address. The second part of the project is aimed to provide law enforcement agencies with new tools through one tender. New tools capable of investigating this dimension in the virtual spaces and connecting through OSINT, as an example, through new system to analyze cryptocurrencies. So creating a link, a connection between police forces, Ministry of Interior, judiciary agencies, and universities who are developing this solution. One of the key issues is how to use artificial intelligence to manage this big quantity of data emerging from interception, from investigation, from digital forensic, how to prioritize the different elements, how to create links in order to understand profiles without reading tons of pages in different languages. So these are the two key elements: cooperation, public-private sector, joining intelligence dimension, a non-governmental organization working in the field, police forces, and judiciary. And this is a big point, because one of the problems we have is the working in isolation, the silos culture who characterize. Second one is to try to focus the problem from a full criminological perspective. So not only investigation, but investigation, subcultures, elements connected to the identity and to the loyalty. So the key ideology and the narrative of this group. Last part, to provide law enforcement agencies and also civil society organization with new tools capable of providing a substantial element to conduct research and investigation. This is this is the core of the project, where it is important also to communicate with the rest of the stakeholders, and therefore the communicative dimension, what we call Work Package 5, is also another very important point, and that's the reason why we are here today.
Yeah. Thank you for your explanation. So, in my opinion, from my perspective, the big challenge, as I told before, is the cooperation through different perspectives. This should be very important for us, that we work in the process of human trafficking. But from my perspective, it's very important to give more tools, more future for the survivors of human trafficking. For me, it's very important not to speak with the word victims, but in my perspective, it's very important to speak about survivors, because the victim is always a victim, even if you start a new life. So the first things that I ask to you is to change the term and don't speak about victim, but survivors.
It's also very important that these projects help a little bit with the narratives that they are out, online when it comes to organized crime. Because what we see, for example, it's a lot of glamorization of organized crime online, and this is a very important aspect. So young people are being recruited online, and they're taking some models that they are not true. So in the online world, what we are seeing is some glamorization of organized crime. It's a lifestyle that these people are putting out there in order to lure young people to join organized crime. So this is very, very, very dangerous. So people are not recruiting right now in the neighborhood as they were doing before. Of course, they are recruiting from the same pool of people. They are recruiting from the same ethnic groups, but they are recruiting online. And online recruitment is really efficient because they can give you all the information out there. But on the other hand, there is a lot of false perceptions that they are distributed online. So the lifestyle of criminality is portrayed there as a glamorous lifestyle. So a criminal organization with purpose, they are putting these kind of images to make the people engage in that lifestyle looking strong, flashing wealth, having expensive cars, having around of them beautiful women and so on. And imagine how vulnerable are young people sitting to some corner of their room seeing these images. So it's very important to also tackle this element.
Yeah, and maybe I completely agree with you, and maybe also to underline how young some of these, I mean, we've been talking about young people, but really we're talking about children, talking about when it comes to drug trafficking, about kids as young as 13, 14, being drawn into exactly the same process of recruitment that you're talking about on these social media platforms, Snapchat. And so really underlining, maybe also going back to the criminological aspect that you mentioned, it is all about status, about this idea that you can get into a certain life by joining these groups. And they're very smart to do that, right? They have specific manipulative strategies. They know how to tap into youth culture. They know what to use as bait. You're saying, status symbols, designer clothing, iPhones, things like that. They're so vulnerable, like you say, because they're so young. And so hopefully the project also can contribute in that sense.
Thank you all for this wonderful discussion, the opportunity to understand the problem from different angles. We will use all this information and suggestions for a better implementation of the project and to give more power to the stakeholders in this project. And we look forward to continue this cooperation.